We are live. Bryan Johnson's Don't Die Summit showcased his $2 million a year anti-aging routine with AI-driven gadgets and biohacking solutions, but some were not so impressed. So we're going to delve into that today. Meanwhile, in the wellness industry, are people sort of brimming with a little bit of tech overload as consumers face an avalanche of AI-powered health tools that give them more questions than answers? Are we drowning in data? We're discussing that today on Biohacking News. Hello, welcome to Biohacking News. I'm Tony White, and before we go any further, please do like and subscribe. Going to go straight on and bring on my guest. Ashley DeLello is the creator of Bio-Emotional Healing. She's a podcaster. She's big on social. She's here to help with trauma and lots else besides. And she's a biohacker. Hi, Ashley. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, so good to have you here as well. And I have wanted to talk about trauma on this podcast for a long time because I'm not saying that all biohackers are traumatized, but after seeing how much Bryan Johnson spends on his anti-aging routine, I think I am.
Yes. I think
Let's
we
go.
all are, right? Because how much
I
it's not,
know.
not feasible for the vast majority of
Yeah,
people.
yeah. I've actually just brought out a book on biohacking, which I should probably mention. And one of the
Yeah.
things I'm keen to point out the whole way through is that a lot of the biohacks are free. And, a lot of the best biohacks are free as well. And then there are some premium options in there too.
hmm
But let me ask you about this first question today then. The Don't Die Summit has just taken place. This is Bryan Johnson's summit. Obviously, a lot of biohacking conferences in the world, and this is something slightly different. Thousands of attendees going there. And it featured a mix of longevity products, DNA testing, and AI-driven health tools. It's been very interesting because in preparation for this podcast today, I've been reading all the press about it, and I've got to say, they don't really like him. And some felt the event was more focused on selling products than delivering in-depth biohacking insights. And also in preparation for today's podcast, I did speak to a couple of people who went at the weekend, and they did sort of feel that a little bit. They said it was a bit disappointed, and the hard sell was a thing. Um, the reason I was so looking forward to talking to you, Ashley, is that obviously your speciality is in trauma and healing. And I want to know what you think of the Bryan Johnson approach of not dying as opposed to accepting dying.
Yes, it's an interesting dichotomy, and I'll tell you a part that I think I agree and align with, but then where I very much disagree. Right.
Mm,
So the importance of this is the premise of my story, because at 13 years old, I was told I was going to die. And I can tell you that in that moment, I was devoted to anything possible to live, right? To not
mm,
die. I was 13 years old. I was the epitome of health one day, overnight fighting for my life. So I certainly know from a very personal standpoint what it's like to really look at death, not just, okay, one day or as I'm older or things could happen, but to live that way. I lived between life and death for 4 years. It
mm,
was a daily fight. I was constantly going all around the country here in the United States, all specialists. This was 28 years ago. So the world was very different, right? What you and I are doing right now didn't exist. All these biohacking tools, Google didn't exist, podcasts, social media, none of that existed, right? So we're talking about a very different time frame where literally I really got to know the power of the brain body connection that we all have within ourselves, separate from any tool, right? Outside of us. So for 4 years, I was trying to not die, right? So in that way, I understand the premise of wanting to live, right? But what was interesting is that even then, I realized every day I could live trying to not die, but that ultimately, for me and for many people, was rooted in fear. I
mm,
don't want to die. So fear drove those mechanisms versus I'm going to do everything in my power to live. And having overcome that, having defied the odds, having faced death for 4 years, like I literally got so sick, I wouldn't go to sleep at night. I would force myself to stay awake because I was so sick. I could barely lift a finger. My skin was yellow from my liver shutting down. My hair had fallen out. I was about 90 pounds. I mean, I was so close. There was days I couldn't even have the strength to talk. It's a very
mm,
scary place to be when you can
Wow.
feel the energy required to even lay still.
Mm.
And so, having overcome that, I literally, yes, there were times where I felt like my body was so sick, so tired. I felt like if I surrendered that conscious will to live, I was afraid if I went to sleep, my body wouldn't wake up. So, from a very personal standpoint, I know what it's like to fight to live in the very real sense. And when I overcame that, I wanted to live. Like my focus was now not on not dying, it was on living. And here's where therefore, I disagree. I think a lot of us don't live life in enough urgency of the acceptance that one day we will die. So we're like, we have time.
Mm.
I'll do that tomorrow. I'll do that when my kids are grown, when I'm feeling more confident, because we think we have time. And I don't live that in a way of fear, but a sense of urgency of this life is a gift. We
Mm.
don't know, what the future holds for ourselves. Every time we leave our house, we get in our car or an airplane or just anything, we don't know. And instead of that being a fearful thing, it's an acceptance of like, I am mortal. And in one way that I align is I do everything in my power to take care of my body, to help
Mm.
it, to move it, to nourish it. And I do the same with my mind because I want to feel my best in my days. But where I digress is that it's actually the acceptance of mortality and the unknowns of what that looks
Mm.
like that help give us a sense of urgency to live life to the fullest, to
Right.
see what's
Yeah.
important, to be present with our family and loved ones, to go after our dreams and not say, well, next year, in 10 years, and then before we know it, we're 50, 60, 70 years old. We don't have the health we did when we were 30, 40, 50. And we didn't go after things because we did have this sense of time.
Mm.
And that's the only thing we really don't have. So I think live your life to your fullest, but there's a beautiful acceptance that we're mortal that allows us to actually live.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. By the way, we lost you for a moment there, Ashley, but we
Oh,
got you back and we styled it out. So
okay.
yeah. So if we lose you again, we'll just carry on, and if you do get cut out, then just dial back in, and we'll speak to you. I'm sure it'll be fine. But so are you saying, because I do quite like the way that Bryan Johnson and his followers, before you know much about them, you think they're going to take themselves massively seriously. And there is a sort of hint of irreverence about what they do. And they're all wearing t-shirts with "Don't Die" across it and that sort of thing. Um, but ultimately, what you're saying really is that acceptance of we're all going to die is actually sort of healthier. And that's definitely my experience, especially with any sort of health issues. Sure, do all you can to biohack it and make it better, but accepting where you are is the only route to real happiness for me, anyway.
Hmm. Well, and there I've seen, and I'm sure you have too, in the biohacking world or just the zeal around health,
Mm.
we can swing the pendulum so far to where we actually have this underlying mistrust with our body. Like there's this
Yeah.
sense of, in order to be healthy, I must do a million things
Mm.
every day. And this is coming from someone who, again, has fought for her life, someone who then 20 years later lost the ability to walk, lived in unrelenting chronic nerve pain, had to overcome that, went through 5 years of hell again. Like
Mm.
I had significant trauma around my body. Like I know the depths of how your body can cause you unbelievable pain and
Mm.
sorrow and remove the ability to do everything you love. So I'm not talking from someone who's just, my body works and it's so easy.
Yeah.
I'm talking from the depth of someone who had to work through severe trauma around my body and really do a journey to learn to trust it again.
Mm.
I went through two life altering health experiences. And that is why I know it's so important to also trust our body. Like we
Yeah.
have these amazing, incredible, resilient bodies that, yes, we have to do our part to take care of and to not abuse and to fuel it to do its best. But inherent with long-term health is this belief and trust that our body was designed to heal, and not that we have to do a million things every single day in
Mm.
order to stay healthy. Because I've worked with so many clients who now have orthorexia, where they're afraid of foods, they're afraid of chemicals, they're afraid of every makeup and product they put on their body. They're
Mm-hmm.
afraid to travel because the hotel might not have
Yeah.
organic sheets, So we can go too far to where now we have this underlying fear around health, and we think we have to do a million things to feel good. And
That's
that's not
now.
healthy either.
I want you to be honest here because you're on biohacking news, but I want you to be honest because I that is an area that I worry about with biohacking, and I know because it can be the case for me as well. And for example, I've got this thing called histamine intolerance, which makes it really hard sometimes because you don't know each individual food. You have to basically figure out whether it's high histamine or low histamine,
Mhm.
and you can end up being quite fearful around food. So that's a perfect example. You don't want to travel sometimes. You think, what am I going to eat? And I worry that some biohackers are a little bit too far the other direction. Is that something that you see in this world? I mean, leaving aside the fact that we're not all like Brian Johnson.
Of course. Yeah. Nor do we have the financial capacity, right? To
Yeah,
And don't
exactly.
get me wrong, I have my own plethora of tools, right, that I
Mm,
utilize, because we do ask a lot of our bodies, and we do live in a very stressful environment just in our world and our pace. So we do need to bring in more proactive, I feel, than
mm,
in any other times, right? But yes, I've worked with a lot of people who went through their own health challenges, a lot of histamine intolerances, which also can be connected to just a nervous system that's in stress. Because
yeah.
when our nervous system is operating in stress, we're depleting resources because we weren't designed
Oh
to
yeah. Yeah.
live there. And we are chronically, right,
Yeah.
living in our sympathetic nervous system. So
And
our
that's
resources
really
are
hard for
drained.
people, by the way, when they're thinking, well, hang on, I can't eat kale because it's high histamine. But
Yeah.
actually, if they could eat all the kale they like if they went on holiday for 2 weeks.
Right, exactly, right? So, and that happens.
Yeah.
So, the core of my work, right, too, when we heal the nervous system and the pieces in your life that altered it, you find suddenly your threshold is greatly expanded
Mm,
in your histamine tolerance and in everything. And the other part of that is you have to understand anything that you've struggled with, and if it's gone on for a long enough time, impacted your life, you've stressed about it, now the brain can have a threat response around
mm,
it. And
mm,
I've gone through many restrictive, diet protocols based on my health and trying to heal, and reactive foods to inflammation, and some gut stuff and bladder stuff that was very reactive to food. So again, I've been on that journey many times and found myself now afraid of food. And the
mm,
challenge with that is that fear can create a symptom where the symptom wouldn't be created, because
mm.
now your brain has a threat response around it. So even the fear of, if I eat this, this will happen, the brain is so powerful, it can create that response just by thinking about consuming the food. Or
And do you think that's the danger with the don't die stuff that people start to make those connections all the time and the opposite starts happening because they're in fight or flight the whole
yeah,
time?
exactly. And I've seen that a lot with people who are so health passionate that now the fear connected to certain behaviors or not drives
Mm,
symptomology. Like, one of the best studies to try to connect this to you is they took a bunch of newly diagnosed cancer patients.
mm,
And we all understand universally chemo has it highly creates nausea, right? In a lot of
yeah.
people. Like, we have that meaning. Chemo, nausea. Everything to the brain comes down to meaning, okay? Meaning dictates our behaviors and our experiences more than anything.
Mm,
So they took these newly diagnosed cancer patients and they really honed in on, you're going to start chemo on this day and you're going to feel nauseous, right? So as they're giving this very direct meaning to their brain, the mass majority of patients on the way to chemo
mm,
reported feeling nauseous,
yeah.
because the brain was preparing
Mm,
for what was going to happen based on the meaning they had in their brain. So in that same way, we can create symptoms
yeah.
by the meaning we have associated to certain foods or experiences. And that's why it's so important in the long-term healing to look at all the pieces.
Mm. So, just to let you know about some of the things that were going on at this anti-aging conference that's just happened over the weekend, because Brian Johnson is so popular, and the signature thing that his people eat as part of the blueprint diet or the blueprint protocol, which is what Brian Johnson is focused on, is what he calls nutty pudding. And it's berries, nuts, pomegranate juice, sunflower seeds, and cocoa. Apparently it tastes like a watered down grainy acai bowl. And I guess that's definitely, it falls under the health passionate umbrella that you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and listen, I eat in a certain way with flexibility,
Yeah.
and when I was fighting through my health challenges, I was a lot more
Mm,
rigorous, right? Because my life was on the line. I wanted everything I was putting in my body to support my immune system. And then when I was in chronic pain, I wanted anti-inflammatory, right? So
mm,
I'm a huge proponent of food does matter, right? We can't discount that. There's way too
yeah.
much research and evidence. And I believe that our body also has the capacity to have some flexibility, right?
Mm,
So I'm very diligent in what I put in my body because I feel my best that way.
yeah.
But I also can choose to enjoy, some
Mm,
other foods sometimes. And I trust that my health is okay because
mm,
what I do the mass majority of time, where people will sometimes consume and then they have guilt, and shame because this is bad or this is good. And again, inherent, we need to build this trust within our body's capacity to take care of it, but also trust it will take care of us.
yeah. Well, we're going to get onto AI powered wellness in just a second. But when I was sort of looking at some stories that related to you coming on this podcast today and stuff that's been going on in your area recently, I was I was reading one story today about how experts are now saying that trauma rewires your brain, leaving you basically stuck in fight or flight, a state called hypervigilance. And I thought, well, yes, pretty obviously. And that was probably the reason behind me starting this podcast 10 years ago. And I went to the jungle, got very ill.
Mm.
The illness went away, and then some sort of post-viral thing, which is very similar to long COVID, left me just in bed for a few months. And the thing that really helped for me was emotional freedom therapy or tapping.
Mhm.
Massive, massive difference. And on my first session, about 10 minutes in, my brilliant tapper, Ashley May, who's been on this podcast actually, sort of said, look, it's really hard for people to accept, but when you're constantly in fight or flight and you're being so hyper vigilant about your health, you're sort of stuck in that sympathetic nervous system and you actually can't heal. So you're sort of contributing to the problem.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
he was very apologetic about telling me that, but it's absolutely right. So these experts now sort of having found this out, I'm guessing you and people in your field have known that for quite a long time.
Yeah, I that it saved my life coming to the truth of that
Mm,
acceptance, right? And here's the important thing. No one's purposefully doing that, right?
no, of
Like we're
course you're
not
not.
sabotaging ourselves on purpose. It's that when you've gone through something significant enough that it does alter your nervous system
Yeah.
to a place where it takes over. It literally says, "Great, you're doing this consciously, but
Mm,
subconsciously, this is the program I'm running. This is how we survive." And I had to realize that because my life got desperate enough and no biohacking tool could save me. And that's
mm,
literally what happened, right? I went through that illness for 4 years. I did not understand what that did to my nervous system. And again, no one was talking about this back then. I lived in fight or flight literally for 4 years. And I was a fighter and I was going to live. But you have to think about that. I hardwired survival mechanisms for 4 years. And then
yeah.
from my brain's perspective, again, subconscious, I wasn't consciously thinking this. I'm like, I survived. And my brain was like, okay, fight or flight allowed us to defy the odds. We need to stay here, right? This is how we survive. And through my professional career, because I was a professional ballroom dancer before I got into neuroscience, I had so many injuries. No
Mm,
matter my ice baths, no matter my warm up, no matter my massages and body therapy and everything I did, which I was so diligent because remember, I'd already been through a health journey. I was getting injured all the time, which I didn't understand was part of that hypervigilance. My body had this stress response that was constantly running that literally made me more vulnerable to
mm,
injuries. And even I was actually in London on the West End doing a show called Burn the Floor, which a lot of the Strictly Come Dancing pros were
Wow.
in. And I tore my LCL while we were there,
Oh my
which was
goodness.
just so devastating. And I just remember thinking, I'm the one taking care of my health the
Mm,
most.
mm,
Why is this happening?
mm.
And that led to 3 hip surgeries and then my chronic pain journey and losing the ability to walk. And when that happened, I threw the kitchen sink. I did all the regenerative injections. I had 200 different types of injections with stem cell and PRP. And I had my PMF mat. I did cold plunges. I did my infrared sauna, red light. Like I did the whole gamut, my anti
Yeah.
inflammatory diet. I did Western, Eastern, alternative. I mean, you think every healing modality, and I was still getting worse. And that's when I was brought to the absolute like desperation and determination. And I looked at my husband and I'm like, there's nothing left. Like, and we were almost losing our home
Mm,
because we were spending so much money.
yeah.
And one night, as I was sitting there going, I don't know what to do, I was thinking about what most of the doctor specialists had told me. Well, your nervous system flipped a switch into pain. For some ones, that could be flip a switch into autoimmunity. That could be anxiety. That could be depression. That could be whatever it is. And I thought, well, if it can flip one way, I'm going to figure out how to flip it back.
Mm,
And no tool outside of me was going to do that. I realized that was an inside job where I had to work with my brain and nervous system to heal piece by piece all the events in my life that had altered it, to get it to a place where it felt it could let go of fight or
mm.
flight and I would still survive because I couldn't heal until I did that.
Yeah. That's hard to do on your own though, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. But it's amazing what someone can do when their life depends on it, right?
Mm,
So I just dove deep into studying neuroscience and pain science 5, 6 hours a day when I couldn't sleep. That's what I did. And I paired everything I was reading with my lived experience and
mm.
created a step-by-step process. Because that's what I realized. It's not just a tool or modality, it's a process to
Yeah.
partner with your brain and work together to heal it from the inside out. And that's how I got my life back. And now
And
that's what I do.
fantastic. And bearing all that in mind, I want to ask about this next story and then how that relates to the sort of the areas of biohacking that can help the most. And obviously, biohacking is a big umbrella for anyone really who's interested in their health. But this new report that's come out this month that says that AI powered wellness is really taking over. And I've certainly seen this in the world of biohacking and health recently. And it's all about personalized health solutions now. AI is apparently making it happen, although it can still be a little bit shaky on its advice. But wearables using biometric data, custom workouts, fitness tracking to a whole new level, a surge in personalization, companies really scrambling to offer customized wellness plans, blending health and tech like never before. And I wonder, bearing all that in mind, how does that relate to what you were saying about using everything that you can and finding the stuff that works for you? And what have you seen in this space that can help us heal from trauma, apart from a very expensive course of seeing a psychotherapist for 5 years?
Sure. I will tell you one of the best biohacking tools that is totally free, and that is writing.
Mm,
So, and not journal writing that you're going to keep, but writing that you're going to throw away.
yeah.
Writing that gives you permission to be totally honest
Mm,
with your darkest thoughts, your angriest thoughts. Because if we look at traditional journal writing, everybody holds back if you think somebody might read it. Like, even if you're trying to be honest, there's some barriers. There's been over 200 neuroscience studies on what free writing does, especially in relationship to trauma. Because
yeah.
when you're going through trauma, you're surviving. And a lot of the emotion and the impact gets stored in the body, right? Because you don't always have the capacity in the trauma to process it fully, right? So that's where then it comes up later in our life through PTSD or through illness or through pain. So writing to really allow yourself, make a list. What are the impactful events in my life that have altered me? Start moving through them and start giving yourself permission to write about how it impacted you, what you wanted to say to, if it involves a person, what you wanted to say, couldn't say, how angry you were, how upset you were. And you're writing to give yourself full permission of expression, and then you're going to throw it away.
Mm.
And I can tell you, after doing this work for 6 years, after living through it, after, again, 200 neuroscience studies, it is one of the best tools to move from processing, ruminating, which we all ruminate over experiences and what happened to us and how it impacted us, to actually processing. Because when you write, and again, studies show you can type it or handwrite it, you slow your brain down. Because when you're just inside your head, your brain can ping pong really fast and not really go anywhere. When you write, you create space between thinking and writing that makes your brain slow down and gives some of your subconscious stuff that's been buried space to actually express itself. It's free. You have the capacity to do it at any time. And I can promise you that if you do, this will be one of the greatest tools to offload trauma, emotional stress, unresolved thoughts, and impact from everything you've gone through from your body, which clears up space in your nervous system to heal instead of to fight.
But it's not a gadget that costs 500 quid.
I know. And listen, like I said, I've got an infrared sauna. I've got the things and I love them. But when it comes to trauma, you have to do it inside out. And this is one of the most effective free tools. And I think the challenge now with all the tools is we underestimate what is free and what is in our capacity.
Absolutely. Yeah. James Pennebaker, you must have read his book, Opening Up.
You know what? I haven't.
Oh, haven't you? I was just thinking that was probably...
I'm going to put it down.
He was the social psychologist who originally did all the research into people living with trauma and then the power of writing their experience down. And so I was sort of assumed that you might have sort of read that at some point. But I think it is, I personally have sort of noticed that anything that helps us connect to our emotions rather than get away from our emotions, which is so easy to do in this, there's so much distraction, isn't there? And, just going back to the emotional freedom therapy, my son is really not enjoying going to school at the moment. He's 5 and it's the start of the school year. And I do the tapping on him. And now he does it on himself and on his teddy, which is very, very sweet.
Oh, I love it.
Because we're not trying to say, hey, don't be sad. We're just trying to say you're sad. And we understand that, and that's the same as writing down how you're feeling. It's connecting with it to release it rather than pushing it away and trying to stuff it into the cupboard.
Right. Well, and then there's so much inherent shame and guilt around challenging emotions, right? In one way or another. Like, I shouldn't feel that way. I got to be tough. I got to be strong. I did that to myself through my illness. You can't be sad. You can't be mad. You got to be a fighter. You got to survive. And we do know what from brain neuroimaging, shame and guilt and self-criticism activates the brain's alarm bells, which sends more stress hormones, which not only amplifies the emotion, but amplifies stress in the body. So yes, we can't move through anything without first letting it in. And just having this kindness and compassion of, hey, we're not robots. Life impacts us. Let's allow it to move through us and out of us so we can then shift to what serves us. Like, it's not an either or, it's an and. And that's what tapping or writing allows this, okay, I'm feeling this way and that's okay. But how do I move through this so that I can serve myself better in my life and choose something that empowers me? But it's okay to also have this. Yeah. And that's, I wish we taught that in school, right? That would serve us so much. We're in a mental health crisis and a physical health crisis when we're supposed to be healthier than ever with all of our tools. We have more disease and autoimmune issues and allergies than ever before, even though we have more understanding and technology. And that is, again, because all of these pieces that are happening inside ourselves that nothing outside can fix if we're not being aware and connecting and doing the work to process how life has impacted us.
Yeah. And then you can also do the infrared sauna stuff and the
absolutely.
Nutty porridge. Who doesn't love a bowl of nutty porridge?
Who doesn't? Got a nice little crunch. Absolutely. Absolutely. I just did cold, for sauna and cold plunge there. I love that. But I also
Yeah.
know that it is not a substitute for internal work.
Mm.
Um, and
Yeah.
sometimes we can run from what's happening inside of ourselves to the tools that we hope will fix us. Because listen, looking at ourselves and saying, how am I contributing to my life? That's uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
So they can be used cohesively. And I feel like when you do it that way, then yeah, you're going to have optimal capacity, but not
Yeah.
one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is, bearing all that in mind, what is the review that you would like to look at today? So this is the main episode, and then we do our little review episode, which is just a few minutes. And you are refreshingly cheap compared to Bryan Johnson right now. So and I don't mean cheap, I mean good value.
Yeah.
So what's your review?
I would say, here's the thing. Um, if I would invest in anything, and of course, I'm not per se cheap in my work with clients, right? Because they have to invest in themselves to do the work, and you know that as well. And we all have to have enough skin in the game to actually show up for ourselves and do the work. My review is that there's a lot of beautiful tools, and I use them. But if you're struggling, aside from the free writing and moving your body and getting outside and seeing sunshine, right? As we were talking about, unless you're in England, that's very hard. I would invest in something that walks you through how to harness capacity within yourself
Mm,
to heal and address. And then all those tools outside of you become an asset that is proactive instead of trying to bring them in reactively because you have so much stress that you're trying to combat or overcome.
So what do you mean? Do you mean therapy, or do you mean an expert, or do you mean, what do you mean exactly?
So obviously, there's lots of people. You have a process, right? That you teach people. I have a process I teach people. We all align with different needs. I'm saying for the people who are like, you know what? I'm doing all the things. I've been doing cold plunge and I've been doing sauna and I've got my nutty pudding and I'm drinking all the water and the electrolytes and like everything's on board. I'm working out. Why do I still feel this way?
Mm,
And that could be physically, mentally, or emotionally. And
mm,
it's not just the route of traditional therapy. There are so many people out there that have stories you align with who figured out, right? So for me, I create bioemotional healing. For you, you have tapping that really allowed you to create that. And it's where people align and say, okay, where can I find someone that I align with that has maybe lived a similar experience and helps people? And why don't I learn what they did
mm.
and learn from them and actually use it? Because the reason why I say go to a specific source is also the challenge today with the amount of information that's out there.
Yeah.
We have equated learning with doing something.
Mm,
Because I can always listen to a new podcast, a new audiobook, a new
mm,
YouTube video, Instagram reel, and I'm learning, but the real gap is between learning and actually doing. And the brain actually
mm,
helps sabotage us of like, well, let's just go learn something because we know you can't really change the brain or the nervous system without implementation of something new. That's how the brain learns something new to change. So when you commit to like a process, I'm going to do this and not just keep learning, but actually follow something that gives me a plan to shift this within myself, that's when change really actually starts to happen.
mm. Yeah, there's a process. My sort of background is that I trained as an NLP practitioner 20 years ago, and then NLP master practitioner and trainer, and now I've sort of written a book on NLP. And one of the real basic but effective techniques in NLP is just called modeling, which is
Mm.
really at every stage modeling other people's behavior. And then when you look at the sort of behavior and environment and capabilities, that can be quite powerful. But then
Mhm.
when you start to model their identity and their values and beliefs, and you cherry pick the best bits and maybe that apply them to your own life, or maybe not, you're just learning, that can be really very powerful. And I sort of feel like there's something similar to what you're saying there.
Yeah. So if I'm going to just commit myself to learning and implementing this
Mm,
versus I'm going to learn from them and them and them and them. And then the brain gets so overwhelmed of like,
mm,
where do I start? What do I do? And we actually don't implement something long enough to
got
actually
it.
feel those changes.
Got it. Got
And
it.
that's
Got
where
it.
I'm
Yeah.
saying find something that you
Mm,
align with. They've lived a similar experience. They speak to you, your personality, what you're seeking, and give it full commitment and
yeah.
then see the change. It's like people in the most basic sense who have been working out for a long time, but they don't have effective workouts or they don't
Mm,
know how to eat. And then they finally commit to getting a trainer that guides them through specific workouts, gives them the way to eat, and they actually commit to it. And suddenly their body starts to change.
mm,
And that's what I mean with an internal job or what we're seeking to change. Find something to commit to. If you already have all these things in line and you're not seeing the changes you want, you have all the tools, all the modalities, commit to actually implementing an action plan so that you can give your brain and your nervous system and your body the actual chance to change.
good stuff. Ashley, it's really lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming on Biohacking News. Really appreciate it. Where can people find out everything that you're doing and working on, and obviously your amazing Instagram channel as well?
Absolutely. So there's my Instagram, my name, Ashley DeLello. My website is my name as well, ashleydelello.com. That's where you can hear more about bioemotional healing, my work. There's a free training on the brain. There's a free brain body blueprint that automatically gives you a 3-step action plan to start interrupting your programmed stress responses. So we break it
Mm.
down to where it's not so complex. And then my podcast, which has been on a break but will be coming back, is the Bioemotional Healing Podcast, which I got to get you on, Tony, when I
I'd
bring it
love to
back
come on.
this fall.
Yeah, yeah. Because when I first went to see that tapping guy, I mean, he was also an expert in chronic illness, and he did. It sounds to me something a little bit similar to what you do. And he said, look, you're going to be interrupting that pattern, and when you
Absolutely.
start doing it, you're going to be surprised at how often you do it. And honestly, I swear to God, I was doing it multiple times a minute. I was like so obsessed with my health because I couldn't get better. I was
Mhm.
like every few moments, I was like, stop. And then I was like repeating what he said to me
Yeah.
and then carrying on. And then, of course, I trained a new pattern quite quickly afterwards.
The brain is amazing. It just as it's adaptive to stress responses and
Mm,
health challenges and mental health challenges, it's also adaptive to changing that. If we're consistent and give it the time to do so, then
yeah,
it can be incredibly adaptive to reclaiming health again.
yeah. Well, I am really excited to connect. Well, yeah, I'd love to come on your podcast. And thanks so much for coming on Biohacking News.
Thanks for having me.
There you go, Ashley DeLello. Make sure you check her out. Thank you very much for listening and watching if you've been watching the live stream. And thanks for listening to Biohacking News. Be back next